All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This one shouldn't be too long. There's not a whole lot of visual, so I'm just doing it on the WordPad. So I apologize to some of you that hate it. Okay, so this is going to be my nicest writing ever. So this one's going to be talking about fertilization. See, that's really good. Top-notch printing. And pregnancy. So we're not going to get into the development of the fetus and what happens after. It's super complicated and it's not really in our outcomes, so there's no point in spending a lot of time. But if you're interested, you can check it out. It's on page 443 in our text, so you can get more detail. So just a reminder, we have these, in order for fertilization to happen, we need our haploid cells, which was coming from the mother and the father, and they're each going to be donating their cells. So male is going to be a sperm cell and female is going to be an egg cell, and then what happens is it forms this diploid zygote, and all the zygote is just the combination of these two haploid cells. Then it develops into an embryo, then it develops into a fetus, and the fetal development we're not actually going to get into. So what you got to think about is there's going to be two stages. So we have meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And so one of the differences that we're going to have here is that meiosis 1 in both the male and the female happen inside the gonad, but the big difference is meiosis 2 in females actually happens in the oviduct. So this is after ovulation has taken place, and when it's within the oviduct, this is where the sperm fertilizes the egg. But meiosis 2, so that second splitting of the chromosomes is going to happen in the oviduct. So that's a big difference. So what has to happen in order for this implantation to occur? So once it's been fertilized, fertilization. Oh, I forgot. Slow down and make it look nice. Fertilization happens, as a reminder, in the oviducts. And once it's been fertilized, it's going to move into the uterus. But what has to happen is certain things need to be there. So the endometrium needs to have a few things in order. So it needs to be thick. It needs to have blood vessels. So blood vessel rich. And it also needs to be secretory. So thickened, as a reminder, so this is because of the estrogen, and these two are because of the progesterone. So this is kind of like the maturing blood vessel rich, and then the secretory, secretory. So once that happens, once it's embedded into the endometrial wall, what's going to happen is the placenta starts to develop. And so for those of you that don't know what the placenta is, it's pretty much the nutrient sac for the organism that's growing. So this sustains the embryo, or the developing fetus, through an umbilical cord. So it gets all of its nutrients via that little cable. So it gets nutrients, gas exchange, because its lungs aren't working yet, haven't developed, and then also gets rid of any nitrogen waste. Another thing that the placenta does is it produces a hormone, and it's called HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin. So another big one. For this one, really, just remember HCG. You don't have to remember the full-out version. The reason why this is significant, though, what the HCG does is it goes back and it tells the corpus luteum to keep secreting. So to continue to function, because usually the corpus luteum is going to break down if there's no implantation that occurs. So continue to secrete estrogen and progesterone. So it keeps that uterine lining secretory and thick. If that HCG isn't present, For example, if there's no implantation occurring, then it would just be regular cycle would start anew with menstruation and the shedding of the endometrial lining. So for pregnancy tests, this HCG, that's what it's testing for. So tested for in pregnancy tests. So this doesn't actually happen for a while because it takes about 3 to 4 days for that fertilized embryo to make it from the oviduct into the uterus. So that's why you can't test straight away to see if you're pregnant. You have to wait for this HCG to actually develop. All right, not much left. We just have one other thing. This placenta, one other thing. The placenta actually starts to produce its own estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone. And after a little while, I'm not sure the exact timeline. So once it's mature enough, the placenta, to develop its own, then the corpus luteum stops. So it pretty much just secretes this until it's ready to be able to produce estrogen and proestrogen on its own. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is a positive feedback loop. We've talked about a lot of negative feedback loops, and then this one is called oxytocin, and that's not the same thing as Oxycontin, which is the painkiller. So this is oxytocin, and so this is the positive feedback loop during labor. So it happens during labor. And what happens is when there's pressure on the cervix, which is the opening between the vagina and the uterus, it sends a certain message. So this is pressure because of the fetus that's really big and it's oversized, it's ready to come out. It causes a nervous system, or a nervous signal, sorry. And what that nervous signal does is it signals the posterior pituitary. So this is a different part of the pituitary that we haven't talked about yet. So the posterior pituitary to release a hormone, oxytocin. Here's a big difference about the posterior pituitary. It's just a holding cell. It doesn't make it. So this is actually made in the hypothalamus. So this can be a bit confusing. So it's made in the hypothalamus but released by the posterior pituitary. So it's kind of like the gallbladder, right? It didn't make anything, it just stores it. So once that's released, the oxytocin acts on the uterine muscle, and it causes it to contract and causes contractions. And then once the contractions occur, it continues to put more pressure on the cervix. And if there's more pressure, well, guess what's going to happen? It's going to signal the posterior pituitary to release more. Oxytocin is going to target the uterine muscle again, cause more contractions, and it creates this positive feedback because the outcome causes more things to happen. So what you should get out of this, here's your questions that you should make sure you know. The difference between meiosis 1 in males and females, just location. Keep doing this. Meiosis 2. Meiosis 1 is the same, meiosis 2 is the different one. What conditions need to be set for the implantation to occur of uterus need to be there. So that thickening, secretory, blood vessels. What is the placenta? What does it do? What does it do? And what does it secrete? And what impact does that have? And then the last thing, don't forget, there's two things depending on what what timeline we're on. And then the last thing is the positive feedback loop. Okay, so hopefully this helps, and we'll see you soon. Make sure you write down any questions you have.